Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and on today's episode, we're talking about the division series in the MLB postseason, which former Rockies are making an impact, and which former Rockies could possibly win a World Series ring, despite the fact that they weren't on their team very long. But that's how rings work. If you're there for just a tiny bit, that's enough to get yourself some new hardware. But let's get things started with the news of the day for the Colorado Rockies. Manager Bud Black is back for 2025. After 8 seasons with the Rockies, most with the organization, games managed, most in wins, he'll be back for year number 9, despite the fact that the Rockies do have a 6 consecutive season streak of losing campaigns and back-to-back 100-loss seasons. This is tied for the longest stretch that they've ever had of losing seasons, 6 in a row. It's happened 2 other times, from 2001 to 2006, along with 2011 to 2016. You look at those and say, well, they were able to make the postseason in 2007 to end that 6-year losing streak, and they were able to make the postseason in 2017. But the thing that's different about those situations was there was a new manager, or a newish manager, that came over and took control of the reins. Clint Hurdle, in 2007, he was a part of 5 consecutive losing seasons, but he got hired in there. And in 2002, it was already a season that was going to be under 500, so he couldn't really right the ship. So he had 4 that was completely entirely on him. Walt Weiss also had a stretch of 4, but this is the first time a Rockies manager has been at the helm for 6 consecutive losing seasons, and now he'll go ahead and get 1 more year for the Rockies, who just don't look like they are ready to turn the reins over to somebody else. A roster that's still young, still developing, still figuring things out. Maybe this is a sign that the Rockies don't really consider their roster ready, on the verge of a breakout. Or maybe it's just that they do think that Bud Black is the man to get them back to October. That was one of the things that GM Bill Schmidt said in the press release by the Rockies, that that Bud Black's set of skills, his knowledge, his experience, are all that perfect combination for this core roster of players that they have, along with the farm system that is coming up right behind them. So whether you believe that or not, or whether you have that faith or not, Black will be back for 2025 on a 1-year deal. Who will not be back? Well, most of the coaching staff is expected to return. Assistant hitting coach PJ Pilateri and bullpen coach Reed Cornelius will not return in 2025. So the front office, owner Dick Monfort, clearly are not pointing the finger at the coaching staff for why this team has underperformed for the past 2 years in such a historic fashion. Remember, the Rockies had never lost 100 games in a single season, and now they've lost it 2 years in a row. With Buddy going into his 9th season, it got me thinking, how many more managers have had a longer time running their team? And there's only 3 that have had more time as their club's skipper. Kevin Cash, who's the longest tenured manager, took over at the start of the 2015 season. He's got a .540 winning percentage. He's won 2 division titles and an incredibly competitive American League East, 5 postseason appearances, and also a World Series appearance in 2020. You've got Bud Black's neighbor and good friend, Dave Roberts, with the Dodgers. Look, that's a great job. I think you or I out there is probably going to be able to manage the LA Dodgers to a 500 record or better, probably. Then again, a lot of the decisions made by a manager aren't on-field decisions. It's more in the clubhouse. It's more player management. It's clubhouse management than it is in-game management. That's something that's done with the front office, with the analytics folks, with the entire coaching staff in mind. So, take that for what it's worth in terms of being the manager of a team that everybody expects big things out of. Roberts took over at the start of the 2016 season, has a .627 winning percentage in his 9 seasons already. Next year, if he comes back, I imagine he will be season number 10. Big shout out to Guillaume in the chat. Appreciate the support over on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, there's a whole channel on YouTube that you're missing out on some wonderful content, some special YouTube shorts where you can find out what's up with the Rockies in only 1 minute, along with some other longer interviews that you didn't get a chance to see. And the third manager that has a longer tenure with his current club is Brian Snitker. Now, he took over midway through the 2016 season, so has a little bit more than Bud Black does with his club. Snitker, .558 winning percentage, 6 NL East titles. In fact, 6 of his 8 full seasons in charge have ended in a first-place finish in the division. 7 postseason appearances, 2021 World Series. Dave Roberts also has himself a World Series win in 2020. 3 World Series appearances as well. 9 postseason appearances, 9 for 9. They've won the NL West every single year other than 2021, when somehow the San Francisco Giants managed to win 107 games. Dodgers won 106. So the 3 guys that have been doing it longer than Bud Black, a lot better track record, I think, at least more recently. Again, you can't take away the fact that Buddy was in charge for back-to-back postseason appearances. That's something that no other Rockies manager has had an opportunity to do. Well, they've all had opportunities to do it, but none of them got the job done. And, I say that, and it's interesting because October 8th, 2024, here we are on the 10-year anniversary of when GM Jeff Bridich took over for the Rockies. And we know how that ended, where he basically walked away from the position in 2021. He had to trade Nolan Arenado, partially because of some friction between Bridich, Arenado, and ownership. And Dick Monfort sided with the front office, sided with the guy that he hired, not the player that he was going to pay $200 million to. They end up casting him off, and the Rockies have really been reeling ever since. But the man who was at the helm of the roster construction, everything, the draft, all of those things, you got to give credit to Jeff Bridich for being the GM for those back-to-back postseason berths. So obviously he gets a lot of crap, and that's understood, but you can still say Bridich and Black, that was the winning combination for consecutive Rocktobers in 2017 and 2018. So, the record's not been great for Bud Black. We also know the roster hasn't been very good. And we know that there's been some development at the major league level for some of these young guys. And I think Buddy has taken a lot of bullets for the roster, where maybe a younger manager, a newer manager might not necessarily, be able to do that. The thing that I find interesting with Buddy returning, and again, I do understand it from ownership's perspective, or rather I should say, I do understand why ownership feels it is a good decision. But it is somewhat historic for a manager to lose 100 games in back-to-back seasons and then come back for a third year. In fact, this will be the 11th instance of that happening. I was very surprised to learn that 10 other times a manager lost 100 games 2 years in a row and still came back that third year. Now, 3 of these previous 10 times, we were dealing with an expansion team. The New York Mets, the Washington Senators from, I believe that was 62 to 64, as well as the Toronto Blue Jays, Roy Hartsfield. So those are 3 instances of a team starting from scratch. They were an expansion club. They lost 100 games, in fact, 3 years in a row. And I think you can probably understand why they decided to keep things the way they were. Not every team that has had that route went there, decided to keep their manager. But you can understand with an expansion club why that decision would be made, especially since it occurred in the 60s and 70s. Twice, 2 of these instances were Hall of Famer Connie Mack, where he lost many 100 games in a season, 100 losses in a season. And Connie Mack was partially the owner of the Philadelphia Athletics. So he's not going to fire himself. So, okay, you can understand that one. One time we had Fred Tenney, who was a player manager. So ownership ended up saving a lot of money. So that really leaves 4 instances, 2 of which were pretty recent. Doc Protho was a guy who was the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies in the late 30s, early 40s. He also was a dentist. But the Phillies were atrocious. Before this recent run, you can even go back to the mid to late 2000s with that Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Cole Hamels, Cliff Lee, Roy Halladay. That team, Jimmy Rollins. Before that, the Philadelphia Phillies were a laughingstock. They were perennially one of the worst teams in the entire sport. They had a 26-year stretch where their winning percentage combined to be .368. Over those years, over that 25-year stretch, they lost 100 games 11 times, including 5 times in a row, and lost less than 90 games only 4 times. They had finished over 500 only once in 26 years. So the Phillies were kind of a laughing stock. It probably would make sense why they would keep their manager around for that long. Fred Henry for the Pittsburgh Pirates, I believe that was 52 to 54, was a very well-liked manager. He eventually ended up winning a World Series with the Milwaukee Braves in a rather big upset over the New York Yankees in the 1957 World Series. And then the final 2 are more recent. So we look and say, man, Bud Black coming back after back-to-back 100-loss seasons, that's never happened before. Not true. And when it has happened, it was a long time ago. A majority of the time, yeah, that is true. But Pittsburgh Pirates stuck with David Bednar, and the Oakland Athletics stuck with Mark Kotsay through back-to-back 100-loss seasons. Now, say what you will about those organizations. Does that kind of fall in line with what the Rockies have been like here in the last few years, or maybe even the duration of their franchise? You could say that. In recent memory, Ned Yost and the Kansas City Royals ended up parting ways after he lost 100 games in back-to-back seasons. The Orioles ended up sticking with Brandon Hyde after 2. That was part of not just a rebuild, it was a tanking rebuild. So that is very much a different situation. But it's important to know the history. It's important to know how frequently something like this happens, to compare and contrast and say, oh, this is unlike anything the sport has ever seen. Not exactly true. At the same time, doesn't mean it's not an absolute rarity, because it is. A lot of pushback on social media for folks saying, hey, maybe the Rockies could benefit from a new voice, especially since there might not be any major changes to the coaching staff. And you are seeing some improvement in some players, but not the team as a whole with the amount that they struck out over this past year. And it does make you think, again, when you go through the pros and cons. I'm very much a devil's advocate thinker. Sometimes it doesn't serve me very well, because I can be maybe a little bit overly critical to myself at times with decisions that I've either made or I'm going to make, because I've got to see it from every perspective to feel it out before I make my decision. So if you say, you know what, the Rockies could have gone a different way and maybe installed a new manager, and it got me thinking, especially when looking at the final 8 teams this postseason. In fact, looking at all 12 teams this postseason, because I'd argue that half the teams that are playing in October, they won it with new managers. Now, the Yankees had Aaron Boone, Dodgers brought back Dave Roberts, Phillies, Rob Thompson, Atlanta, Brian Snitker. Again, all these guys with track records of success, not just in the postseason, but in the regular season, just as important. Brandon Hyde came back. He's sticking around. We'll wait and see if that ends up staying true, because after losing their series, the vacuum, right? They lost 2 in a row, best of 3 series against the Kansas City Royals. They got vacuumed. They're now 0-5 under Brandon Hyde these past 2 seasons. So we might be looking at a new skipper down in Baltimore. But A.J. Hinch, also a strong track record, not in Detroit. It was during his time in Houston. Nevertheless, 6 of the 12 postseason managers were coming back from last year. But the other 6 were new. Stephen Vogt, first year in Cleveland. Fully expect for him to be the American League Manager of the Year. Same thing in the National League. Pat Murphy in Milwaukee. I expect him to be the Manager of the Year. Mike Schilt in San Diego, first year, gets them to the postseason and probably going to take down the Los Angeles Dodgers, as I had predicted. Joe Espada, been there a while in Houston, but a new voice after Dusty Baker in 2024. And you got to give him a lot of credit when, after the month of April, the Astros were looking really bad. They had a ton of injuries. They found pitching somewhere and ended up winning the American League West again, rather improbably. And then Carlos Mendoza taking over for an incredibly successful manager in Buck Showalter. He takes them to the postseason and, in fact, is 1 win away from going to the NLCS for the first time for the Mets since 2015, nearly a decade for them. That's 5 brand new managers in their first year took their teams to the postseason. I'm going to give a little bit of credit to Matt Quatraro because although he took over the helm in 2023 and they lost 106 games, a 30-win improvement over last year. That's what the Rockies are hoping to do, is win 30 more games than they did in 2024. But they're going to have to do it with the same manager rather than someone with a newer blood like a Matt Quatraro in his second year with the Royals. Now, there were 3 other new managers this year. How did they fare? Well, Craig Counsell, I think, was a disappointment in Chicago, but the Cubs were still over 500, and they didn't get worse. Same record as in 2023. Bob Melvin in San Francisco, they were somewhat of a mess, but 1 game improvement. And then the third manager this year from the offseason, Ron Washington for the Los Angeles Angels. They were 10 games worse with Washington, and we kind of know the Angels to be a bit of a mess right now from top to bottom throughout their organization. You want to go back to 2023? Okay. Again, Matt Quatraro took them to the ALDS in his second season. Skip Schumacher, 15-win improvement for the Marlins in the first year. Year 2, not so good. He's not going to be around anymore for the Marlins in 2025. Pedro Grifol, big failure. Rob Thompson and Rob Thompson and John Schneider, they took over midseason in 2022. They were able to navigate their teams to the postseason that year, as well as their first full year as manager in 2023. And there's one more guy that was installed as a new manager in 2023. That was Bruce Bochy of the Texas Rangers. They went on to win the World Series that year. A new manager can do wonders for your club. You want to go back to 2022? Buck Showalter and the Mets, 24-win improvement in the postseason. Ollie Marmol, 3-win improvement for the Cardinals and an NL Central title. Bob Melvin, 10-win improvement for the San Diego Padres. They went to the NLCS that year. And then the fourth team, similar to the White Sox, who are a mess top to bottom, and their new manager didn't make a difference. Similar to the Angels, they're a mess top to bottom. Their new manager didn't make a difference. You had in 2022 the A's hiring Mark Kotsay as their manager, another organization, a mess from top to bottom. But you can see what a new manager can do in their first year, getting a new voice. So of the 18 first-year managers since 2022, only 4 got worse. And Kansas City made the postseason in year 2. So 14 teams got better with a new manager. 12 of the 18 made the postseason in their first year. That's 67%. So what does that mean? Again, a new manager provides benefit in their first year in the standings. That is, unless your club isn't a bit dysfunctional. And in that case, it doesn't really matter who you bring in. Don't know which side of the aisle you are on in that one. But nevertheless, Bud Black is going to be back in 2025. So whether or not you agree with that, he is coming back. And frankly, again, regardless of which side you rest on with first-year managers, it might not really matter very much in Colorado. It might be more valuable for the Rockies to have a steady hand like Bud Black, helping navigate this team to more relevance. Think of it like Walt Weiss in 2016, preparing the next guy for the gig. So maybe Bud Black can do that. Now you say, well, if the Rockies are relevant and they can win low 70s, I think it's possible. Again, the offseason is going to dictate a lot of that. A lot. But if they can be low 70s, they're high 70s. I mean, shoot, they're right around 500. Are you bringing Bud Black back for accomplishing that? Or are you then going to the new manager? That's another lifetime away. 1 year from now is a lifetime away. But we'll get a chance to see what new managers will do in 2025 for the Reds, who have just hired Terry Francona. I think they're going to be a lock for the postseason. Again, based on a somewhat of a small sample size, but look, trends can trend. That's what's happening in the game right now. And you say these trends are true until they're not. It's not always true that a new manager can get that kind of action out of his new club. But right now it does seem to be that way. So Terry Francona and the Reds, yeah, pencil them in for the postseason. Dan Wilson in Seattle, I think the Mariners are going to be a lock for 2025. That is if they keep Dan Wilson around. He was 21-13, .618 winning percentage. Looks like Jerry Dipoto, GM of the Mariners, he made his move a little bit too late for that to go down. They ended up finishing 3.5 back of Houston. We'll wait and see what happens with the other teams. White Sox might be in need of a new manager if Grady Sizemore doesn't come back. Marlins in need of a new manager. Skip Schumacher and the entire coaching staff are done. And again, Baltimore could join that list. If so, if Baltimore puts in a new manager there, I think then they become a lock for the postseason in 2025. Not a big stretch because they've got the roster, but now maybe they can overcome some of the unfortunate accidents, if you will, of the postseason these past 2 years. 0-5 for this talented Orioles team that, again, despite the excitement that they bring on their roster and despite the all-star game selections that they have, this group has yet to win a playoff game. That's something. That's something that they're going to have to address in a big way. Now, going into Tuesday in Game 3 in the National League, we had a 1-1 tie in all 4 series. That never happened before. That's wonderful. That's exciting. That's keeping things interesting. We have that because the Royals ended up getting back a win in Game 2 over the Yankees. Garrett Hampson, yes, that Garrett Hampson, formerly of the Colorado Rockies, started in center field, batted 9th, was able to record 2 hits there, had an RBI, had a 2 RBI single in Game 1 that gave the Royals a go-ahead lead. So Garrett Hampson making his mark in October. Appreciate Ams, the comment over there on the YouTube side. Again, leave a review too if you are enjoying what you see. Appreciate the support. Got to say that I was a bit stunned by the end result of that Tigers-Guardians game on Monday, with the Tigers winning in Game 2. Look, going into this postseason, it was going to be anybody's bet. If I was a betting man, and I'm not, I would have taken 2 or 3 of the underdogs to win the World Series, because I think anybody can beat anybody. It's really going to be true, I think, going forward in just about every postseason. But this year, because we didn't have a single team that won 100 games, first time since 2014, because of that, it seemed as if this was one of those years where anyone can beat anyone. And we're seeing that already just in the division series. But the Tigers down to their final out against an otherworldly closer in Emmanuel Clase. Talked about it at the end of last week with Clay Snowden from Just Baseball, who covers the Detroit Tigers. Emmanuel Clase is doing some Mariano Rivera type things, at least in the regular season. Now he coughed up one of the biggest losses of his career. It wasn't a save situation because it was a tie ball game, but nevertheless, 2 outs in the 9th at home, gives up back-to-back singles to the 8 and 9 hitter, Jake Rogers, and Trey Sweeney of the Tigers. And that sets the table for Kerry Carpenter, who didn't even start the game. 3-run home run. Emmanuel Clase not only had given up only 2 home runs this entire postseason, he had yet to give up a 3-run home run in his career. And it finally happens. That's the playoffs for you. That's the playoffs. In the National League, Mets end up winning Game 3. Not a very close one there. 7-2 victory for the Mets, who got a great performance from Sean Manaea. 7 innings pitched, 1 run allowed. Pete Alonso, Jesse Winker, homer, both off of Aaron Nola, who was just not his best. Game 3 in San Diego, Walker Buehler versus Michael King. And at the time of recording, Padres hang a 6-run inning on the Dodgers at home in the 2nd inning. But it's 6-5 right now. Still anybody's ball game. I said this over the weekend that even if the Padres had been down 0-2, even if they lost that wild Game 2, I'll talk a little bit more about that on Thursday's show. Got Javier Reyes from Just Baseball talking on the show at noon Mountain Time. On Wednesday, talking Leo Morgenstern, talking about the Philadelphia Phillies with him. He's also from Just Baseball, Fangraphs, amongst many other outlets. It's going to be easier for him to just explain who he doesn't work for than who he does write for. He's going to be talking Phillies, Mets, get caught up on the postseason. But it comes down to anybody right now. And despite being behind, I think this Padres team has what it takes to take down the Dodgers and probably win in the next round as well. You know, you see what those games look like in Philadelphia and how wild the crowd is. At this point, it just feels like the crowd in Philly is wild because they're wild people. They are just wild in general. And that's great. And that's passionate. But there's not the same need. There's not the same desperation, if you will, when it comes to Padres fans at Petco Park. And so that little bit of je ne sais quoi, if you will, I think has a little bit more weight in the postseason in places like San Diego and maybe even in Citi Field for the Mets fans who are also maniacs. But there's a lot of them there that are dying to win. And yeah, sure, there's a ton other that are there just to get a photograph with Grimace. But I think those things can make a difference in a postseason, not just a home field advantage where it's a sold-out ballpark where everyone's wearing your team colors and rooting for you. It's that they need you. They love you. They are here to support you, and it's almost unlike anything they had ever experienced. They've experienced it in LA. They've experienced it in Philadelphia. They've experienced it in the Bronx with Yankees fans. But San Diego, Kansas City, Detroit, you can say that about. These are places that need this. Their fan base absolutely needs this. And that's not going to win or lose a ball game, but that could be that little extra oomph that those teams need to move on to the next round. We got a couple remaining Rockies in the postseason. As I said, Garrett Hampson for the Royals. Look, Jordan Lyles, he could get himself a World Series ring if they win it all. And very naturally, if the Royals win it all, even if they don't, even if they just get to the World Series, left-handed reliever Will Smith, he will make his 4th consecutive World Series with his 4th different team. That's pretty wild to think about. Yankees got Tommy Kahnle there coming out of their bullpen. He was a Rule 5 pick by the Rockies in 2014. Actually snagged him from the Yankees organization, was eventually traded away for Yency Almonte. Yankees bench coach Brad Ausmus, also a former Rocky, not exactly, a Rocky minor leaguer. Ausmus was taken in the expansion draft in 1992 and was later traded to the Padres in one of the worst trades the Rockies have ever made. They gave up 3 all-star seasons, 1 from Ausmus, 2 from a pitcher in Andy Ashby for Greg Harris, veteran, and an aging Bruce Hurst, who was on his final leg in a lot of ways. So that goes down as a bad one. And bullpen coach Mike Harkey also pitched for the Rockies in 94. Cleveland doesn't have anybody on their active roster or even in their roster this entire season that has any ties to the Rockies or played with the Rockies. They do have the hitting coach Chris Valaika, brother of Patty Barrels, Pat Valaika, and Sandy Alomar Jr., the first base coach, actually was a Rocky for about 2 months and is the only Rocky, trivia question, the only Rocky catcher to ever receive a vote on a Hall of Fame ballot. Yeah, I know you think of him with Cleveland, and that's fine, but he did play for the Rockies, and had he gotten in the Hall of Fame, you would have seen Colorado on that plaque. Detroit, similar boat, nobody in their postseason roster comes from the Rockies, but Ryan Vilade would win a ring for his 17 games with the Tigers this year. Bly Madris, another one of those players that has Colorado ties, went to Colorado Mesa University. In Philadelphia, you got Jeff Hoffman and Carlos Estevez. Estevez ended up giving up 1 run today on Tuesday. It was unearned. And you're probably thinking, oh, was that his debut? Well, besides the fact that he did pitch in Game 2 for the Phillies, he also pitched in that wild card game in 2017, missed all of 2018, so he wasn't a part of that run, but he was a part of the 2017 wild card game in Arizona. David Dahl did play 19 games with the Phillies. He could be a player that ends up becoming an option if one of the Phil's outfielders gets hurt. And you also have on the coaching staff of the Phillies, bullpen catcher and assistant catching coach Hector Rabago, the brother of former Rockies minor leaguer Chris Rabago. In New York, Rockies bullpen legend Adam Ottavino and Jose Iglesias are there. as well as Colorado native and Regis Jesuit High School graduate David Peterson, also part of the Metropolitans. Padres got Elias Diaz. And for the Dodgers, they don't have anybody on their postseason roster, no coach that has Rockies ties, but former Rocky Dinelson Lamet played a couple games this year with them. And Michael Peterson also contributed. Peterson played in the minors with the Rockies in 22 and 23, actually represented Great Britain while with the Rockies during the 2023 World Baseball Classic. So super excited for a couple more shows coming up this week. Leo Morgenstern, as well as Javier Reyes, also from Just Baseball, talking more postseason, giving you the latest on the Colorado Rockies. You can get so much more of that on the socials at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, and at Rockies_insider. Appreciate everybody that was in the chat. You guys keep me going. You give me a lot of momentum. But as you know, that momentum is fine and good for today. But really, in the podcast world, it's only as good as my next show. So naturally, I'll talk to you then.